He saw her name tag, Sky, glanced at the long brown braid falling over her apron, and smiled. Not warmly. The way a man smiles when he's already decided the ending of a joke only he knows. To Nathan May, head of the May Syndicate, the most feared criminal network operating across 3 continents, the young maid standing at his table with her notepad and her quiet eyes was simply the evening's entertainment. Aurelian, Manhattan's most gilded private dining establishment, was his unofficial throne room. He held court here. He closed deals here. He reminded people, carefully, elegantly, of exactly who he was and what he could do. Tonight, he decided the girl with the braid would be his warm-up act. He didn't know that Sky Brooks was not just any maid. He had no idea that his decision to open his mouth in Khartoum, a dying Eastern European criminal dialect spoken by fewer than 400 people alive, would not only detonate in his face, but would unravel the carefully buried secret he had spent 14 years protecting with blood. This is the story of how one man's arrogance walked him directly into the trap a woman had spent 3 years quietly building around him. If you love stories where the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone ignored, stay with this one. The air inside Aurelian smelled of aged burgundy, truffle butter, and the particular silence that only serious money can purchase. For Sky Brooks, it mostly smelled like patience running out. Crystal chandeliers threw amber light across ivory tablecloths. The walls were paneled in dark walnut, lined with gold-framed mirrors that reflected the room back at itself, wealthy, curated, untouchable. Aurelian was not simply a restaurant. It was an ecosystem. A place where fortunes were confirmed and hierarchies enforced over 5-course meals, where the staff were expected to be present without existing, attentive without being human. Sky had mastered this completely. She moved between the tables with the practiced economy of someone who had learned, in a different life, in a very different kind of room, that invisibility was not weakness. It was a weapon. She adjusted her navy apron, checked her notepad, let her eyes do the quiet work they always did, reading the room, cataloging the exits, clocking every face. Table 4 needed another bottle. Table 7's guest had switched seats. Interesting. The maitre d', Gerald, was hovering near the host podium with the particular tension of a man waiting for a thunderstorm he couldn't stop. It was 9:15 p.m. on a Friday. The private dining room was full. And then Gerald's face changed. He crossed to Sky in 3 quick steps, his voice dropping to something that barely qualified as sound. Nathan May. Table 1. Full service. He pressed a menu into her hands. No errors tonight, Brooks. Do you understand me? None. The words moved through the floor staff like voltage through a wire. Nathan May. She had waited 3 years to hear those 2 words in this room. She kept her face exactly as it always was, calm, unreadable, a fraction below a smile, and walked toward table 1. He was already watching her approach. Broad across the shoulders, dark beard trimmed close, a black shirt open at the collar with tattoos climbing the full length of his left forearm like a map of every dangerous place he'd ever been. Beside him sat an older man, Victor Crane, 70 if he was a day, bald, wearing a navy suit that cost more than most people's rent, his pale eyes carrying the specific exhaustion of a man who has kept too many secrets for too long. Nathan May picked up the menu. He didn't look at it. He looked at Sky. And then he turned to Victor Crane and spoke, not in English, not in anything the room would recognize in Khartoum. The guttural, archaic dialect of the Eastern European criminal underground. The language of men who believed their words were safe because no one around them could possibly understand. Look at this one, he said, his voice lazy with amusement. She's going to write down whatever I tell her and smile at me like she's grateful for the chance. Victor Crane's mouth twitched. Sky's pen touched her notepad. She let him finish. She let the smirk settle fully onto his face. She let Victor Crane breathe out a quiet laugh. She let the moment reach its peak, that precise instant when a man is most certain he is untouchable. Then she looked up, and in flawless, unhesitating Karchin, every consonant exact, every inflection native, she gave him his order back, confirmed his wine preference, and said, "Will that be everything, Nikolai?" Not Nathan. Nikolai. His birth name. The name erased from every government record 14 years ago. The name that did not exist. Nathan May's finger stopped midpoint above the menu. The smirk didn't fade. It simply ceased to exist, the way a light goes out, not gradually, all at once. Victor Crane's jaw dropped open. And in the gilded, chandelier-lit perfection of Aurelian's dining room, where old money whispered and power performed, the most feared man in 3 continents sat completely, utterly still. Skye clicked her pen closed. "I'll give you a moment," she said, in English this time, softly, pleasantly, and turned back toward the kitchen. Behind her, the silence at table 1 was the loudest thing in the room. Skye Brooks had not always been the girl with the braid and the notepad. There was a version of her that wore a different kind of uniform, one that carried no apron strings, no pen, no carefully rehearsed smile. That version sat in windowless rooms in buildings that didn't officially exist, surrounded by audio equipment and classified transcripts, translating the private conversations of dangerous men into intelligence that governments acted on before sunrise. She had been exceptional at it. By 26, she spoke 11 languages with native fluency, not the textbook kind, the kind that gets you through an airport. The operative kind. The kind built from immersion, from months inside communities, from training her ear to catch not just the words, but the weight behind them. She had a particular gift for dying languages, the obscure and the discarded dialects that criminal networks adopted precisely because they believed no analyst alive could follow. Karchin was one of them. She had spent 8 months learning it from a retired linguistics professor in Krakow who hadn't spoken it in 30 years. She recorded every session. She dreamed in it before she was done. Her handler, a quiet man named Reeves who always smelled of instant coffee and never once raised his voice, told her she was the best he had ever run. She believed him. She had no reason not to. Then came Gdansk. It was supposed to be a contained operation, a wire intercept on a shipment coordination meeting for agents on the ground, Skye running audio from a safe house 2 streets over. Clean, surgical, 48 hours maximum. She remembered the cold coming off the Baltic, the way the safe house windows fogged, the particular stillness of the hour before everything went wrong. She never found out how the location was burned. One moment the channel was clear. The next, Reeves' voice cut out mid-sentence, and she heard boots, too many, too fast, and then a voice she did not recognize issuing orders in Karchin to clear the building and leave nothing. She got out through a basement window with a dislocated shoulder and her recording equipment. Reeves did not get out at all. She never saw the face of the man who gave the order. She only had the voice. Low, deliberate, utterly without urgency. She spent 3 years finding the man it belonged to. Getting the job had been the easy part. Aurelian didn't advertise openings. It didn't need to. Its staff turnover was managed quietly through a private hospitality agency that screened candidates with the thoroughness of a background check and the discretion of a confessional. Skye had spent 4 months building her cover before she ever submitted an application, a seamless service history, 2 impeccable references from establishments that existed and would confirm everything, and a version of herself that had never once worked for anyone with a government clearance level. She was hired on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she understood the room. Aurelian operated on a hierarchy as rigid and unspoken as any intelligence network she had ever run inside. Gerald, the maitre d', controlled access and mood. The senior servers owned the VIP section and protected it like territory. The junior staff, the ones in navy aprons, the ones who refilled water and cleared plates and were thanked by no one, moved through the entire floor without restriction, because no one thought to restrict people they didn't truly see. Skye had built her entire career on that precise oversight. She learned the sight lines within the first week. Table 1, Nathan May's table. Always Table 1 sat at the intersection of two sight corridors, visible from the host podium but acoustically sheltered by the curve of the east wall and the ambient noise of the open kitchen. A man sitting there could speak at a normal volume and be heard only by the people he chose. It was, she recognized immediately, an architect's gift to anyone with something to hide. She began mapping conversations the way she had once mapped intercepts, not writing anything down, never writing anything down, storing it in the part of her mind trained to retain verbatim audio under pressure. Shipping routes discussed over the lamb course. Names exchanged with the casual confidence of men who believed the girl refilling their glasses had no interior life. Financial structures outlined between the entree and the dessert menu, because Aurelian's kitchen ran slow and the wine kept flowing, and powerful men, she had long understood, could not sustain silence. 3 years. 41 documented visits from Nathan May. Hundreds of hours of conversation she was never meant to hear. She heard all of it. She remembered every word. She didn't rush. That was the first thing. The instinct in a moment like that, the instinct of anyone who had not spent years training it out of themselves, would have been to move quickly, to put distance between herself and the table, to let the adrenaline carry her feet faster than was natural. Skye walked at exactly the pace she always walked. Notepad at her side, chin level, eyes forward. The kitchen doors swung shut behind her, and the noise of the service lines swallowed her whole. She had 40 seconds, she estimated. Maybe 60. She reached into the inside pocket of her apron, not the front pocket where the pens lived, the interior one, the one she had sewn herself into the lining on her 3rd week of employment, and removed a small white envelope, sealed. Her thumb running once across the flap to confirm it was still closed. She had prepared it 6 days ago, when the reservation appeared in Aurelian's system under the name M. Associates, the corporate alias Nathan used when he didn't want Gerald counting his visits. She set it on the steel prep shelf beside the pass and began entering a table order into the system, her fingers unhurried on the screen. The kitchen doors opened behind her 23 seconds later. She knew without turning that it wasn't another server. The footfall was wrong, too deliberate, too measured, the walk of a man making a point of appearing casual. One of Nathan's, almost certainly the younger one who had been seated 2 tables back facing the room all evening, shoulders too straight for a dinner guest, eyes too busy for a man supposedly studying the wine list. She let him reach her before she turned. He was close enough to be a warning. She held out the envelope without expression. "Give this to him," she said, her voice the same tone she used to recite specials. "He'll know what it means." The associate looked at the envelope. Looked at her. The calculus behind his eyes was visible: threat assessment, instruction retrieval, uncertainty he hadn't been trained to show. He took it. Inside, written in Karchin in her clean, precise hand, was a single line. No signature, no preamble. Just an address in the 11th arrondissement of Warsaw, the safe house Nathan May had used to disappear a witness 4 years ago. The one that had never appeared in any file. The one only the man who ordered it would recognize. She gave it 12 minutes before she returned to the floor. Long enough for the envelope to have reached Nathan's hands, long enough for him to have read it, long enough for the particular kind of fear that lives beneath arrogance to begin its slow migration toward the surface. She lifted a tray from the pass, confirmed the table numbers with Gerald without meeting his eyes, and pushed back through the kitchen doors into the amber light of the dining room. Nathan May was sitting exactly as she had left him, perfectly still. The menu closed in front of him untouched. His expression had been reconstructed into something that resembled composure the way a repaired fracture resembles an unbroken bone, functional, but visible to anyone who knew where to look. Victor Crane was not at the table. Skye noted it without pausing, without redirecting her gaze, absorbing the detail the way she absorbed everything in this room, passively, completely, the way a surface absorbs light. She delivered the tray to table 6, smiled at the woman who thanked her, and turned back along the east corridor. She found him near the coat-room alcove at the far end of the hall, half turned toward the wall, one hand pressed flat against the paneling as though he needed it for balance. His phone was at his ear. His other hand, the one not holding the phone, was trembling in the particular way that belongs to old men confronting things they had believed safely buried. She slowed. Not enough to register. Just enough to hear. "The girl is not a girl," he was whispering, his voice stripped of every layer of authority it had carried at the table. Raw underneath. Frightened. She spoke it. She spoke it cleanly. Someone gave her access or a pause listening. "No, you don't understand. She knows the dialect." That means she was. Skye moved past him and did not stop. But her mind had already detonated quietly around a single, seismic realization. Victor Crane was not frightened because a maid had surprised his employer. He was frightened because he recognized Karchin, not as a curiosity, not as a shock, but as a personal exposure. The recognition of a man who had used it himself. He had been in Gdansk. Victor Crane was the missing piece she had spent 3 years unable to find. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Inwood, at the northern tip of Manhattan where the rent was still human and the streets didn't pretend to be anything they weren't. It was spare by any measure. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, a kitchen she used for coffee and not much else. No photographs on most walls. No objects that carried sentiment in any visible direction. Anyone walking through would have read the space as temporary, the apartment of a person passing through, not staying. That was intentional. 3 years ago, she had packed everything that mattered into a single storage unit in New Jersey under a name that wasn't hers, and she had not retrieved any of it. Attachment, she had learned in a windowless room in a city that no longer felt real, was a vector. Something an enemy could find and apply pressure to. There was one photograph. Just one. It was taped to the inside of the wardrobe door rather than displayed, visible only when she opened it each morning to dress. A girl of 19, caught mid-laugh at what appeared to be a backyard somewhere, with too much sun and not enough shade. Dark hair, their mother's nose, a gap between her front teeth that she had always been self-conscious about, and that Skye had always privately considered the most honest thing about her face. Her name was Mara. She had been living as Anna Reeves in Portland for 2 years and 4 months, working at a plant nursery, taking community college classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, building a life in careful, deliberate increments under an identity Skye had constructed and funded and protected with the same precision she applied to everything else. Mara did not know the full shape of what her sister had done to keep her safe. She knew enough. She knew to answer to Anna. She knew not to search for their old names online. She knew that the woman who called her every Sunday evening from a rotating series of numbers loved her in a way that had no language adequate to it. Skye opened the wardrobe door every morning and looked at the photograph for exactly as long as it took to remember what failure would cost. Not her own life. She had made a certain peace with the risk to that. Mara's life. Mara's laughing, gap-toothed, entirely innocent life. That was why there could be no mistakes. Not one. Gerald found her at the service station at 10:47 p.m. She knew it was significant because Gerald did not speak directly to junior staff as a rule. He delegated downward through a chain of senior servers and hand signals and the particular pointed look he reserved for anyone moving too slowly near the VIP section. Direct contact meant the message had come from somewhere he could not delegate away from himself, somewhere that made him unwilling to have anyone else carry the words. He stopped beside her without preamble, without his usual performance of authority, and spoke at a volume designed to reach only her. "Mr. May requests your assistance in the wine cellar." A pause in which Gerald seemed to be weighing something privately and finding it too heavy. A private matter. Immediately, he said. She looked at him for a moment. His eyes were doing what everyone else's in the room had been doing since the envelope came back, sliding away from her, finding the middle distance. The studied non-involvement of people who have correctly assessed that whatever is happening at table 1 tonight is something they do not want any part of. The sommelier near the pass had suddenly found the inventory sheet fascinating. The senior server who had been watching her since the kitchen incident was now watching the floor. Even the busboy clearing table 3 had developed a particular focus on the far wall. No one was going to intervene. No one was going to remember, if asked, that they had seen anything at all. Skye set down the water pitcher she was holding. She reached into her apron pocket and closed her hand around her phone, pressing the side button twice in the sequence she had programmed 3 months ago, the one that opened the audio recording application and locked the screen simultaneously, leaving no visible indication that it was running. Then she straightened her apron, smoothed it once from the waist down, the way she did at the start of every shift. A habitual gesture that tonight felt like something closer to armor being checked before a door was opened. She had been waiting 3 years for Nathan May to put himself in a room alone with her. She followed Gerald to the cellar door, and she descended. The cellar ran the full length of the building beneath street level, and it was cold in the way that old stone is always cold, not the sharp cold of weather, but the permanent, indifferent cold of something that has never needed to be warm. Nathan May was standing between 2 rows of floor-to-ceiling wine racks, arms crossed, his back to the far wall. The single overhead light source was a row of dim amber strips installed to protect the bottles, and in that light his tattoos disappeared into shadow and the angles of his face hardened into something older and less curated than the man who had sat at table 1 performing ease for his consigliere. He had sent everyone else away. That told her everything about his current calculation. He wanted no witnesses to whatever version of this conversation he had planned. She filed it and stepped forward until she was close enough to speak without raising her voice, and then she stopped. For a long moment neither of them said anything. Then Nathan May uncrossed his arms, and the performance fell away from him completely, not slowly, not in pieces, but all at once, the way a coat drops when the last button gives. His shoulders changed. His jaw changed. The careful construction of Nathan May, legitimate businessman, loosened at every joint, and what was underneath was simply a man in a cold room who was afraid. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she had expected. Stripped of its earlier amusement, stripped of everything theatrical. "What do you want?" Skye reached into her apron pocket and held up her phone, screen facing him. On it, clean and simple against a white background, was a QR code. "Scan it," she said. "See what the world receives at midnight if I don't enter today's reset code. Every intelligence network you've ever burned. Every name you've ever buried. Every transfer, every manifest, every record that Nikolai Voss ever existed and exactly what he did." His hand moved toward the phone, a reflex, fast and hard. She stepped back, a single clean step, and looked at him with an expression so level it was almost gentle. "That would be unwise, Nikolai." His hand stopped in the air between them. And Nathan May, Nikolai Voss, stood in the dark and understood, for the first time in 14 years, what it felt like to be the least powerful person in the room. She had rehearsed this moment more times than she could count. Not the words. The words had been fixed for over a year, written and rewritten in the privacy of her own mind until they were load-bearing, until there was nothing in them that could be negotiated away or misread or turned back against her. What she had rehearsed was her own stillness. The management of the part of her that had carried Reeves' name and Mara's photograph and 3 years of enforced patience to this precise point, and now wanted to let all of it surface at once. She kept it where it belonged. Below the waterline. Invisible. She lowered the phone but did not put it away. 3 things, she said. Only 3. Nathan watched her with the eyes of a man recalibrating rapidly, searching the edges of the situation for an exit she had already closed. The first was a signed, legally binding identity protection instrument for Anna Reeves of Portland, Oregon, full legal personhood, permanent and irrevocable, supported by documentation that would survive any attempt by the syndicate to unravel it. Not a favor. Not an arrangement. A document, executed properly, witnessed and filed through channels clean enough to hold up in any jurisdiction. The second was a complete severance of her own name, every version of it, real and operational, from any syndicate record, database, or association. She wanted to cease to exist in his world with the same thoroughness with which Nikolai Voss had ceased to exist in the legitimate one. The third was Victor Crane's written confession. Gdansk. The burned safe house. Reeves. All of it in Crane's own hand, signed and notarized and placed in escrow with an attorney whose identity and instructions were already established and whose dead man's protocol mirrored her own. It would never be released. Unless something happened to Skye or to Anna Reeves. In which case it would be released to every relevant authority simultaneously, along with everything on the server the QR code unlocked. She finished speaking and waited. Nathan May stared at her for a long time. She watched him work through it, the angles, the counters, the variables. She watched him find, one by one, that she had already been there before him. He held out his hand for the pen. She produced one from her apron pocket. He signed. She came up from the cellar at 11:52 p.m. The dining room was thinning. The chandelier threw its amber geometry across tables being quietly reset for tomorrow, across the backs of the last remaining guests finishing their wine in the unhurried way of people with nowhere they needed to be. Gerald was near the host podium with his handkerchief and his careful eyes. He looked at her when she emerged and then looked away, which was, she understood, the closest thing to acknowledgement she would ever receive from him. She walked to the staff room without stopping, removed her apron in a single motion and folded it once, precisely, and set it on the shelf above her locker. She put on her coat. She collected nothing else because there was nothing else to collect. She had never kept anything personal in this building, never left any trace of herself in any drawer or corner of this place that she could not afford to leave behind. She did not look at the chandelier on her way out. She did not look at the white tablecloths or the gold-framed mirrors or the dark walnut walls that had held 3 years of conversations she was never meant to hear. She had no feeling about leaving that she could identify as sentiment. Only the clean, structural sensation of a thing completed. The street outside was cold and quiet. She walked half a block before she stopped and took out her phone. Mara picked up on the second ring, the way she always did, her voice carrying that particular mixture of relief and careful casualness she had developed for their Sunday calls, a tone that said, "I was hoping it was you," without saying it directly. Skye closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she said it. "You can use your real name again." The silence on the other end lasted long enough to contain everything that had no other place to go. Then Mara made a sound that was not quite a word, and Skye stood on a cold Manhattan street and let her sister cry without rushing her toward the other side of it. When the call ended, she opened the server application and entered the reset code. Then she stayed on the screen for a long moment, her thumb hovering. She did not delete the file. She pressed archive. Because Nikolai Voss was leashed. But she had not survived 3 years of careful, invisible work by assuming that leashes held forever. She knew better than anyone what happened when powerful men decided a constraint had expired. She put the phone in her pocket and walked north into the dark, and she did not look back once. If Skye's story got under your skin, if you felt something when Mara finally heard those words, then you are exactly who this channel is for. Hit that like button. It really does help the channel grow more than you know. And if you have not subscribed yet, subscribe now and tap the bell so you never miss the next story. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below, tell me where you are watching from, and tell me this: at what moment did you realize Skye was the most dangerous person in that room? I read every single comment. See you in the next one.